So do y'all have fun with the lions? Yeah, I knew that was going to step on my talk, though. That's why I scheduled my talk in this time period, so I can make up the difference and get us back on schedule. And Ken already mentioned some of the things that I'm going to talk about. By the way, my name is Joseph Brady, and I head the research department there at the Colorado Chinese Medicine University. And we're actually coming into some very exciting times. When I first started in this medicine, I would go to a medical conference and they would treat me like a witch doctor with a grass skirt shaking a rattle. Which from Ken's talk, I understand that wasn't necessarily too far from the truth if you go back far enough in time. But these days, it's a very exciting time in Chinese medicine in the United States, in that for several reasons that we'll be going over, the science is actually kind of starting to catch up with using, for studying things like Chinese medicine that address the health of the whole person. In the past, it was always difficult because in Western science, you have to have one disease, low back pain, for example, and one treatment, say just acupuncture, and one outcome in order to have a good randomized controlled trial. But Chinese medicine doesn't work that way. You can have the practitioner, when they're checking your pulse and looking at your tongue and doing the diagnosis, they're looking at every aspect of your health, not just one chief complaint. And so we need a way to study it that looks at all the different aspects of health. The practitioner also can use many different types of modalities. You can have the acupuncturist who feels that acupuncture needles alone are good enough for this situation, but in many times it takes herbs to be able to do it. I always felt that if I hadn't learned the herbs, it would have been like practicing the medicine one hand tied behind my back. In addition to that, there's dietary recommendations, there's lifestyle changes, there's Tai Chi and Qigong, and there's actually this whole host of treatments that Chinese medicine practitioners take like a grab bag and adjust the treatment to the individual and what's most appropriate for them. So that's a second level that you can't use standard randomized controlled trials because you have to try to convince them to only use one thing. And if you've dealt, some of you are acupuncturists, if you dealt with acupuncturists before, and Chinese medicine people, if you try to get them to stick to a same protocol for every patient, it makes them crazy. There was one study they did where they were looking at one herbal medicine for blood pressure, lowering blood pressure. And they set it all up, nice randomized control trial. They actually hired a Chinese medical practitioner to prescribe the herbs. And all of a sudden, they were getting like unusually good results. I said, wait a moment. So they found out the herbalist they had was doing the Chinese thing. And after someone was started on herbal formula, he would call each patient and find out how you feel. Oh, it upset your stomach? Oh, we changed formula. Oh, this one, no, you got a back pain now too? All right, we'll change formula. And so by the time they were done, they had over 100 different herbal formulas. When the researchers found out about it, they confronted the guy and said, you ruined the experiment. We have to stop now. And they actually said this. They said, you're treating each patient as if they're different people. That's the way the medicine is supposed to be practiced. In this country, and also in China, the COVID epidemic presented some great opportunities. In China, one of the things they noticed very quickly was that people that did Chinese medicine don't go to the hospital nearly at the rate that people that only do Western medicine. My wife and I had gone to China 25 years ago, and things have changed quite a bit. But in the last 25 years, the Chinese people are all enamored with Western medicine. And they all want MRIs, and they all want a knee replacement, and they all want a CAT scan, and that machine in the back that goes beep, beep, beep. They want that kind of medicine. They found out during the pandemic that people who do Chinese medicine don't go to the hospital at nearly the rates of people that only do Western medicine. And the people that only do Western medicine are killing their healthcare system. We made a deal, I'll talk to you a little bit later up, with Kunshan Hospital of Traditional Chinese Medicine, which they're billing at the world's first fully integrated Chinese medicine hospital. that the doctors are trained in both Chinese medicine as well as Western medicine. And they had the school sign a deal with them that we'll do student exchange and we'll have scholars go back and forth and try to improve their knowledge of scientific research on Chinese medicine and our students' knowledge of how the medicine is actually practiced in China. But after we signed a deal with them, they then took us to Jiangsu Hospital, the biggest hospital in the province, and they showed us why they needed it. Jiangsu Hospital gets 60,000 outpatient visits per day because of this emphasis on Western medicine. They do have a Chinese medicine department, but it's very small. And 50,000 outpatient visits per day is not sustainable. They had to build a train station under the hospital just to get the patients in and out in a timely fashion. Again, during the pandemic, they discovered that people that do Chinese medicine don't go to the hospital at nearly the rates of people that only do Western medicine. And so the idea is they want to prove the concept in Kunshan and then spread it to all 30 hospitals in Jiangsu province. And then from there, if they can prove the concept and it all works, to spread it to every hospital in China. That's in China. In this country, Rand Corporation, which I've got appointed as a Rand scholar to do research between Rand Corporation and the School of Chinese Medicine. And basically, if you're not familiar with it, during the Manhattan Project, the US had brought together all their top scientists in one place. And when the war was over, they told all the scientists to go home. And the scientists figured, no, that's crazy. We have an opportunity to work with all the best scientists, and they wanted to keep it together. And so they created their own Rand Corporation. Rand stands for Research and Development. Anyway, during the pandemic, their mission is to research the greatest threats to US national security. And during the pandemic, the COVID was the greatest threat to US national security. And when they looked around at the research, they were kind of shocked in that they found that there's all this wonderful research on how effective and safe this medicine is, and yet nobody was using it. To give you an example, just because my time's going to get cut a little short, in the program for the event, you'll notice there's a bunch of review studies on the top research, the latest research on all the different areas in Chinese medicine. So integrative oncology, Chinese medicine for pain, Qigong, like Ken was talking about, and whole person health, which is a big new kind of push for NIH, is to look at those things that treat the whole person and not just one aspect or one part or one disease. And so we're in a new era of collaboration and discovery, and the school has access to Rand's best scientists to use artificial intelligence to find better ways to study this kind of multimodal, multi-intervention, multi-outcome kind of medicine, like Chinese medicine. And Rand also noticed that during the pandemic, the people that did Chinese medicine, like the Chinese, didn't go to the hospital at nearly the rates of people that only did Western medicine. In which case, you remember through the pandemic, ending up in the hospital and getting intubated in intensive care was pretty much a death sentence. So the idea was the Chinese medicine couldn't cure COVID, but if we can keep people out of the hospital, many more people survive. And in the last 20 years, the rates of people using Chinese medicine in the United States have nearly doubled, in that it forms a very effective community-based form of preventive medicine that people in the US are already using, even though they're not supported by our healthcare system. Anymore, we're no longer considered alternative medicine. The term now is integrative medicine. And like Ken was talking about, they've done studies with people that do Chinese medicine, and it's only very few people that do Chinese medicine because they had a bad experience with Western medicine. Most people are simply looking for more choices. It was like during the COVID epidemic, if you weren't sick enough to get admitted to the hospital, They told you to go home and treat it by yourself without ever telling anybody how to do that. Where we spent the pandemic at the school on telemedicine, teaching people how to take care of themselves at home and doing remote treating with herbs and things. Where Western medicine, they just said, we'll go home and see what happens. If you get sick enough, we'll admit you to the hospital. That wasn't good enough. But these days, the term is integrative medicine. And the idea is, how can these two medicines work better together rather than separate? In the US, we really don't have any kinds of preventive medicine programs. This year, the United States, for the first time, we're going to top $5 trillion in healthcare costs. $5 trillion. How much of that do we spend on prevention? Anybody? It's still less than 3%. It's less than 3%. That's insane. Let's do a little mental health test and see how crazy y'all are. If you go to leave this afternoon and you stop in the bathroom and the sink is overflowing, would you A, turn off the water, or B, go get a mop? Well, this year, the United States is going to spend $5 trillion of your money, your tax money, on bigger, better, more technological mops. And very little effort is being made to turn off the water. Number of reasons for that. One of the reasons for that is that Western doctors feel like there's not enough evidence. There's not enough good quality evidence for Chinese medicine to make it part of mainstream medicine. Now, like Ken was saying, if someone says that to you, they are in dire need of doing some reading. If you look through the brochure for the event today, you'll notice there's hundreds of good quality studies that are listed in there for all the different aspects of what Chinese medicine can treat. There's been a wealth of information that's come out, but still we need more. If you look through those, you'll notice that a lot of the evidence, particularly for Qigong and things that are less, we know more about acupuncture than we do about herbs. We know more about acupuncture than we do about Tai Chi or Qigong or Chinese dietary therapy. So much more research needs to be done. But from our point of view at the school, the research needs to be done from a culturally based system. It needs to be done in a way that respects the way Chinese medicine is actually practiced and how it uses all these different modalities and not just simply acupuncture for one thing, and be able to treat people in a wide variety of ways. This is during the meeting we went to at Kunshan Hospital. And this is the hospital that they have. It has 1,000 beds. And it's, again, the world's first fully integrated Chinese medicine and Western medicine hospital. And they did the architecture according to Chinese medicine principles. For example, the idea of nature's therapy. There's a 50-acre park that surrounds the hospital that people can practice their Qigong and do their Tai Chi and do their cardiac rehab and their cancer support groups in the park, in nature. They designed the building so every patient bed has its own window that the patient can look out on the park and watch the swans instead of just sitting there feeling sick. In the hospital, I thought this was the coolest part. The hospital has a Qigong unit, and before a patient is dismissed from the hospital and sent home, before the patient is released, they send them to the Qigong unit, and the patient has to learn the Qigong for their particular disease. So if they've got cardiovascular disease, they learn cardiovascular rehab Qigong. If their patient has chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, they learn Qi breathing. And the idea is before you're released from the hospital, you are to commit to being an active participant in your own healing and no longer a victim of your disease. I thought that was brilliant. In this country, we go out of our way to make people feel like a victim of their disease, like you've got no choice about it. But the reality is the patient has a lot that they can do in order to help their situation along and get on the road to mending. We were a little bit disappointed when Jackie and I were taken to a number of different hospitals. We went there 25 years ago. Tai Chi was everywhere. Didn't see any Tai Chi. Where was the Tai Chi? So finally, they took us to Nanjing Hospital of Chinese Medicine, which is right next to the Olympic Training Center. Tai Chi is now Olympic training level. All the Olympic athletes are required to do Tai Chi. They consider it basic training for all sports. And the older adults, to work on their balance, prevent falls, all those wonderful benefits of Tai Chi, they get to train with the Olympic coaches. They get to train with some of the best coaches in the country. The Chinese consider grandma not falling down, breaking a hip, to be just as important as an athlete winning another medal that maybe has too many medals to begin with. And so they took us this whole unit at the Olympic Training Center, they call Tai Chi pre-disease exercises. And they work on their translations a little bit. They come up with a better term than that. Like I was talking about, NIH in recent years, Elaine Langevins headed up the complementary and integrative health section with NIH, NCCIH, and she's pushed a lot of the different departments of NIH toward looking at studying this idea of whole person health, to look at things that affect the health of the whole person, not just one part. A good example there is with physical activity. So if, for example, if somebody has their glucose levels are too high, their A1C is too high, the doctors in the West, they can put them on metformin, in which case that will improve their A1C. But it also creates about a dozen other side effects. So you fix one thing and you create a dozen others. Whole person health is the idea is, can we treat people like with just plain physical activity where it affects heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and affects a whole host of health problems. It affects mood, depression, anxiety. I can go on and on down the list. In fact, the one study they just recently did is one bout of physical activity, one bout, changes the biochemical environment in every single cell in your body toward being healthy. Problem is, in this country, we don't have forms of exercise that people will actually do over time. We had brought a Chinese delegation over to Denver once years ago. We took them to City Park about 10 o'clock in the morning. They thought it was wonderful, beautiful park. It's got a zoo, it's got a boathouse. And the one guy asked me, when they passed the law, what law? They must have a law. There's a law that forbids people from being in the park in the morning, right? Because he was absolutely shocked by the fact the park was empty. In his hometown in Kunming, that park would have been filled with thousands of older adults practicing their Tai Chi, practicing their Qigong, ballroom dancing, the way the Chinese government has it now, trying to push more and more Chinese medicine and re-educate the people. Each of the hospitals, this is fascinating, has a museum associated with it to Chinese medicine, to re-educate their people about their own medicine, because they've become so enamored with Western medicine, they've all forgotten it. And so on TV, where we put public service announcements about staying healthy on at about 3 o'clock in the morning, they have Qigong classes in prime time on TV. They have Tai Chi classes in prime time on TV to try to re-educate their people and to keep care of themselves rather than waiting until they get sick. And so again, this is a little bit of the stuff that NIH is working on, in that the health of the person involves the entirety of the person, mind, body, spirit, also social activities, also the environment in which you live in, the community in which you live in. For part of this, a fascinating one for me was we went to a mall, brand new mall in Nanjing, and it was surrounded by this park. And this was maybe 9 o'clock at night. And there were about a half a dozen groups of older women doing dance classes in the park, baton twirling, and several different kinds of, Jackie tell you more about it. She tried joining in with them. But the government has made it to where they've deliberately, when you're going to build a mall, you're going to build a new center, you have to build in exercise space. You have to build in space for Tai Chi. You have to build in space for dance classes in order to keep people healthy. I thought it was brilliant too, because they put in these little merry-go-rounds. And so grandma and grandpa can bring the grandkids, let them ride the merry-go-round while grandma practices her baton twirling. But again, I love this idea of taking the health out into the community, not just in a hospital setting, that the entire community has a stake in keeping people healthy. This presents some real problems when it comes to trying to study these things, in which case you've got a million factors, really. If you want to get, so some of the scientists working on genetic factors, epigenetic factors, social factors, psychological factors. Whole person health covers a wider range of things, which make it extremely difficult to study with normal randomized controlled trial methods. And that's where artificial intelligence comes in. Rand Corporation has me working with a number of their scientists on applying artificial intelligence to trying to study these kinds of complex systems. I know we've got people using artificial intelligence in everything these days. I don't know that it needs to be used in every single thing we touch. I mean, it's fine to have Netflix use AI to pick out a movie recommendation for you. But one thing that we're insisting on, I'm also in a group for NCCAOM for their AI task force. And that when you never, ever, ever, I work with the stuff, you never, ever, ever want to leave an AI without adult supervision. It needs to be watched by real human beings with real eyes in order to catch things. In which case, what it's useful for is doing things in a unique way that we haven't been able to do before. To be able to let Chinese medical practitioners practice the way they want to give dietary recommendations, to go ahead and do acupuncture, cupping, moxa, give them some Tai Chi classes, whatever it takes. And then let the AI sort out all the different relationships between all the different therapeutic inputs versus the effect on the health. And then if we can assemble a large enough database, hopefully someday down the road, be able to see if a particular combination of things tends to be more effective for this disease or that disease versus another. I'm tending, as I look at it more and more, and we've got some data coming in, to think that that might not work, and that it may be that there is no one path to health, and that the Chinese saying about there's 1,000 paths to the top of Mount Tai, there may well be 1,000 different ways that people can stay healthy within their own interests and their own inspiration. But right now we're using AI analysis to look at the multimodal individualized types of treatments in Chinese medicine, also to map the motivational pathways that predict outcomes. Anybody here before you came here today did not know that physical activity is good for you? Anybody not know exercise is good for you? Why don't people do it? Well, even here in Colorado, we're the most physically active state in the country. And it's still less than 30% that actually meet the Surgeon General's recommendations. We've got 70% of people in Colorado that are not physically active. Don't even talk about adding diet to that. So one thing we want to know from this is what gets people on the way? What gets people to follow the Tao of a healthy lifestyle? And the idea of pragmatic clinical trials are different from randomized clinical. You still randomize people, but the idea is you actually study what's going on in the community. So rather than having randomized controlled trials that are done in carefully controlled clinical settings, randomized controlled trials are what gave us opioid drugs. In a carefully controlled medical trial situation, those drugs worked wonderfully. And nobody ever dreamed of what would happen when you put those drugs out into the real world and all the problems with addiction and overdoses that have come from that. So a result of that and many other studies that didn't quite work on a randomized level, They're looking to do more pragmatic clinical trials where you actually look at really what's going on in the community. That, when you do that, that makes it messy. I found out in the one study we did, we got 1,330 older adults living a healthy lifestyle following the Tao. And I was shocked by the number of different ways people have to spell the word aerobic. But yet the AI can sort through that. The AI can take messy data and messy information from real world settings, and it can make sense of it in a way that would take years for a researcher to do. So right now, the School of Chinese Medicine, the hospital in Kunshan, we've got other connections with the Cleveland Clinic, and we've got the Rand Corporation determined to build a bridge between Western science and the ancient practice in traditional Chinese medicine and classical Chinese medicine. And I was really impressed when Jackie and I went to China, that they are, and many of you will be happy about this, they're finally allowed to talk about the spiritual side of medicine again. That was forbidden during the Cultural Revolution. And when we went to the one Suzhou hospital, the head of the hospital gave me 4 classics on Chinese medicine that have never been translated into English, that have been hidden away since the Cultural Revolution, because they're all about the spiritual side of medicine. So refreshing that they're finally allowed to talk about that stuff again. So ancient wisdom and modern science, side by side, were guiding us toward a more complete, compassionate model of care. A lot of Chinese medicine practitioners have been afraid for years that under a scientific microscope, would it turn out that Chinese medicine is not working? I'm happy to tell you, the better research designs they use and the closer they look, the more they like what they see. Chinese only did observational science. They didn't do experimental science the way we do these days. But when you observe things carefully over a 5,000-year history, you tend to learn a thing or two. In which case, the problem now is verifying that these things hold up under experimental circumstances. And the artificial intelligence and advances in information theory allow us for the first time to really study the medicine on its own terms. Thank you very much, folks. Enjoy.